Hey, everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
You're listening to the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network, brought to you by Interstate Batteries. Interstate Batteries has been a proud supporter of the Sportsman's Nation since day one. So if you need batteries for your truck, batteries for your trail cameras, TV remote controls, flashlights, you name it, Interstate Batteries has what you need. They have thousands of retail locations all over the United States. So stop in, talk to a battery specialist, or for more information, visit interstatebatteries.com.
My name is Clay Newcomb, and I'm the host of the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. I'll also be your host into the world of hunting the icon of North American wilderness, the bear. We'll talk about tactics, gear, conservation, but we'll also bring you into some of the wildest country on the planet chasing bear. Guys and gals, mark your calendar for March 28th. The Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma Backcountry Hunters and Anglers chapters are putting on the first ever Ozark Black Bear Bonanza. This event is designed to give a ton of amazing information about hunting black bear in this part of the world. There's going to be, the event starts at 2 o'clock and lasts till 9 o'clock. And there's going to be 4 main events. Number 1, there's going to be a bear fat rendering demonstration, which I'm going to be doing. Number 2, there's going to be a bear biologist panel. Bear biologists from Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri are coming together to do a panel to talk about all things bear in this region. Number 3, we're doing a live Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. Yep, the first ever live Bear Hunting Magazine podcast, complete with an owl hooting contest and some live music. Thirdly, the final event of the night will be a storytelling event. So mark your calendar, March 28th, Bentonville, Arkansas. I didn't say that yet. Bentonville, Arkansas. Hey, check all of our social media stuff, Bear Hunting Magazine social media, to find out more information. But you're going to want to check this out. On this podcast, I met with Hal Herring. Hal is a incredible guy. He's a longtime outdoor writer. He's also host of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Cast and Blast podcast. But he's more than that. Hal's from North Alabama and is just a unique, fun guy. And I had a great conversation with him. You're going to enjoy this podcast. We are in Shannon County, Missouri, which is southern Missouri. I would call it the northern Ozarks. Being from Arkansas, this is like Yankee territory.
Way up north.
Way
other
up
side of the line.
No, we're in the Ozarks. I've got with me Hal Herring. I'm going to introduce you in a minute more in depth, Hal. But
Okay.
First, we got to It got cold on that boat this afternoon, did it not?
It did, and we were coming back in a pretty good old small snow squall.
No doubt. So this afternoon, Hal and I and Brandon Butler, our mutual friend Brandon Butler, we were on the Current River. And this is kind of like south central Missouri, maybe southeast. It's probably on the eastern half of the state.
Yep.
It's about 4.5 hours from where I live in northwest Arkansas, and we were on the Current River. This is my first time over in this part of the Ozarks. Beautiful section of the Ozarks. Yep. A lot of public land. Big, wide. I was actually impressed by the size of that river.
Yeah,
for the drainage basins that I thought we would see, I figured it'd be a smaller river.
Yep.
This river was, I don't know, there were parts of it that were probably 60, 70 yards wide.
Yep.
Maybe more than that.
Yeah, 12 foot of water in holes. And
yeah, fast moving.
Yeah.
And we were smallmouth bass fishing.
Yeah.
And you were the first.
Catching them.
You caught more than any of us.
Yeah.
You did.
I was mastering my side of the boat.
Yeah, you were. You were casting over me sometimes, trying to take my good spots.
Whatever I could get. Yeah. I also had that braided line.
Yes.
And when you're jig fishing like that, the braided line actually is a game changer a little bit.
Is it really?
It is, because there's no stretch in it. So whenever I was getting those light hits, I was getting them. I was
see
feeling
what you're
them.
saying. Okay.
It's like perch fishing or something.
Yeah, I knew you had to have had some kind of advantage over me. No, we just fished for a couple hours this afternoon with Brandon's buddy Billy.
Yep.
Can you remember his full name?
I think his last name's Smith. He has a guide service
yeah,
right there.
Scenic Rivers.
Scenic Rivers.
Buddy,
that dude can fish.
Yeah.
He's a tournament fisherman as well.
Yeah. So we were fishing smallmouth bass out of a jet boat with a trolling motor.
Yep.
And we probably caught, I don't know, 10 or 12 in just a couple hours.
Yeah, for sure.
Two of the fish were nice.
Yep.
What I would call brownie bass.
Yep.
Brandon had never heard them called that, smallmouth bass.
Yeah.
You know, probably the two biggest ones were pushing 2 pounds, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just nice fish.
Yeah. And when it's that cold, like I was saying, growing up in Alabama, like you just didn't get on the fish that much in the winter.
Right.
And maybe it just was for lack of trying. Like because those fish were there. They were good. They were going pretty good today.
They were. And he said that this is actually some of the best time. I was surprised to hear him say that. I would have thought he would have said the springtime, deeper into the, well, we're still in late winter.
There's no people out there.
Yeah.
We had it to ourselves.
And it was freezing cold.
Yeah, it was.
Running up that river. I think he said at one point we were going 21 miles an hour when we were going back upriver, so we were going faster when we were going with the current downriver.
Right.
But
you can feel every mile per hour.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm still cold, and that we got out of the water 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
So I've just kind of come to know Hal this weekend, but I'd heard of you and knew of you for a while now.
You've been vice versa just recently.
Yeah. So Hal is just in short. I'm going to give you a short introduction, then I want you to introduce yourself. But Hal is a freelance outdoor writer. He's an author. He's written a book back in the 2008 or so about
that was
a gun book.
It was a gun book, Famous Firearms of the Old West, which was a fun project.
Yeah. But you primarily made your living as a freelance outdoor writer, working for Outdoor Life, working for
Field and Stream. Mostly.
Field and Stream.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
And Bugle, like Elk Foundation, and then everybody else. Nature Conservancy put me on for a while as a freelancer. I was all traveling for them. Worked for High Country News, which is a Western outdoor environmental publication, really, out of Paonia, Colorado. I've never been to the office there, and I've written for them since 1998.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. I've cobbled it together whatever I could.
Yeah. And as of late, for the last 2 years, you have hosted the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers National Podcast.
I have, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And that came about just because of, like what I was telling you, like a conversation around a fire one time. And this young lady there who was more technologically savvy than us old geezers, she just said, somebody, like I was listening to this guy, Greg Munther, who's a trad bow guy, and a very successful hunter. He was a U.S. Forest Service. I can't remember what he did Forest Service for career,
Yeah.
And he just has an enormous amount of experience out in natural resources and hunting and stuff. And she just said, man, I wish somebody was getting this down.
Yeah.
And it was important because people die and huge amounts of knowledge fall away with them, Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about that when I decided to take this on. It wasn't something I was that interested in at first,
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's
it's been
amazing.
good to me. Yeah.
Well, so you are from North Alabama. Tell me about just a little bit about your background.
Sure.
Because now you've lived the last 20 years in Montana.
Yeah, almost 30.
So tell me about your early years and then why you moved out to Montana.
You bet. So I was I wrote some when I graduated from University of Alabama, and I wrote some. Then I published some fiction and some essays and stuff like that. But I had worked when I was like 10 years old. My parents, who had grown up in South Alabama, they bought property outside of Huntsville, and we moved out in the country and redid this 1836 log cabin. And that was kind of their dream, And we had big gardens, and we just kind of I hunted and fished, which is all I'd ever wanted to do up to age 10. I just got to do it 1,000 times more. And we fished like the people around here talk about catching these red horse, these big suckers.
Yeah.
It was like I was obsessed with red horse. When
Really?
when I was a kid, and
Snagging them,
yeah, and then and fishing worms on the bottom, waiting for them to show up. Like March 14th, they always showed up, but at the end of February,
you had it down that
pretty close
to the day.
Yeah, because we had some really small creeks that they would show up in.
Oh, I'll be darned.
And I mean, it was just amazing to go down to this creek. It's like 10 feet across, and all of a sudden there's these big fish everywhere.
Wow.
So it was just a lifestyle like that. And one thing happened. I went to Montana to a writer's workshop in 1988, but it was all kind of came together. I worked for paper companies as a tree planter when I was in college. And we did a lot of stuff. I worked commercial fishing, too, for a while in the Gulf. But mostly we were tree planters and with a hodad, which is a hand tool. And you can plant. And down there you'd get $33 a thousand.
Wow.
And so and a decent day was $3,000 and a good day was $5,000. So you're talking about being 19 years old in the early 1980s. Minimum wage is like $4, right?
Yeah.
And you're racking down $100 days. That's a pretty good incentive, and you live outside. And so I came to Montana in 1988, and on the train from Chicago to Montana, there was this guy who was a tree planter. And he said, hey, man, if you're a real tree planter, you can make a fortune out here, which is not true, really. But
you rode a train. I want to stop you at train to Montana. You rode a train to Montana.
I got on a train in Memphis, and it goes Memphis to Chicago, Chicago to Seattle.
How many days did it take to get out there?
It's like 3.
Really? Why did you take a train?
I wanted to see what everything looked like.
Okay, so it wasn't like...
Yeah, no, it was like you could,
I was thinking in 1988 there were different ways to travel. It wasn't that long ago.
Right. No, it was a good way to get out there. And then, but so I realized that you could actually go out west and make a living,
Yeah.
versus like going on a vacation or something, which we never had any money for. And so and year after that, my wife and I, the woman who became my wife, we drove out there in our respective truck and car, and I got a job like off. I put my name up at a co-op, and I got a job working hay crew, and I knew how to drive tractors and stuff like that. So I ended up staying on that ranch for 2 years. I didn't tree plant. I just worked that ranch. It was like a hay farm and hay operation, and but it was right on the edge of Bitterroot National Forest. And I killed a small bull elk the first year that I was legal resident and got a tag. And I just was hooked after that. It was like too much to leave.
Yeah. And so you guys moved out there in 88?
89, we moved out there, and then I came back for a while in my late 20s to try to see what I was going to do, And then we just decided it was too good to leave behind.
So you stayed out in Montana.
Yeah. And raised my family there.
And so did you do timber work out in Montana?
I ended up doing lots and lots of it. I would go seasonally. We'd tree plant for a couple, this was a few years, tree plant in the early spring over Idaho and eastern Washington.
Yeah.
And you'd come back when tree planting was over, say at the end of May, and you did timber thinning.
Yeah.
And then we'd thin timber all through the summer, and then usually quit, maybe go back tree planting for 3 weeks in the fall.
Yeah.
And then you're done in the winter. And you didn't do, we'd go skiing and ice climbing and wandering around and stuff.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a lot of money, like for extra money.
Yeah.
So we weren't like at the ski resort very often.
Yeah. So when did the writing come in, Hal?
About, I was probably about 30. I went to graduate school in creative writing. And I came out of that and I went back to forestry work. But
so you went to graduate school, so you got your master's.
I did in creative writing.
Creative writing.
Yep.
Okay.
And I was 30 by then. But
and then you went back to planting trees.
Yeah, I had to. I'd never had student loan debt before.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you got to come up with this money every month.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And I applied for some teaching jobs and stuff, but I don't think anybody in their right mind would have hired me, But it was one of the things happening. We had this big controversy in Montana at that time about game farming, captive trophy shooting.
Right.
And one of the biggest operations was right down the road from where I was living. Mm. And I knew all these people that worked there, and I knew how it all worked. So I wrote a story about that, and that eventually led me to Field and Stream. This was old school. Like,
early 90s?
Yeah. And I think that story actually was not published until about 98.
Okay.
But I started in on this game farming controversy. And lo and behold, what shows up in there was chronic wasting disease, right? Mm. And so I got on the chronic wasting disease beat.
Okay.
And Field and Stream was great for that. And I worked with I had steady work with Field and Stream through this chronic wasting disease coverage.
Back in the late 90s?
Yep.
I'll be done.
Yep, and early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I got that actually carried me to the Atlantic Monthly. At one point, it's the only story I ever wrote for the Atlantic Monthly.
Yeah.
And I really thought I was kicking the world's butt, especially like we were talking about earlier. Like if you got a labor job or you're thinning timber for $500 a week, to get a writing paycheck for $650, that's pretty competitive.
You're cheating the system, man.
Yeah, exactly, and you feel pretty good.
That's the way that I would describe. Me and you have some similarities in that I graduated college. And I started working with my hands, started a landscape company and was doing stone work and all kind of, just grubbing in the dirt, working.
Right.
And, man, I felt like I was cheating the system when I got paid to sit behind my computer and type an article. I was like, dude, they're paying me for this?
Exactly.
That wasn't much.
Yeah.
It wasn't much money.
Right. But you're not really making a lot anyway. Like,
That's right.
it was, so it was, people asked me about that, and I was like, I don't know if you realize, like, how little we how much how little we lived on, like some of those years, Well,
I think back in the day when print publications were the media source.
Yep.
I think people made more money, didn't they?
Oh, they did. And
anymore writers aren't making a lot of money.
That's right. I came in at the end of that.
Okay.
For sure.
Like,
I think Jim Carmichael was still writing at Field and Stream, like the rifles guy.
Yeah.
And I remember I was still around when he retired. They kind of retired him.
Yeah.
And after that, it was more of us freelancers.
Yeah.
And it wasn't anymore. It wasn't a big career that you went to the Atlantic Monthly or the Field and Stream.
Yeah.
It was this gig economy deal,
Yes. So it was different.
And it was different. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I never wanted to be like fully employed somewhere where I had to go to New York City and sit in the office.
Yeah.
Are you a passionate writer? Do you enjoy that medium of communication, or was it just a kind of a means to an end that you were just really good at? Okay, I love to read.
Okay.
And I was probably the most voracious reader of my age. I was terrible at math and stuff like that, but I loved to read. And so I love the after you've written, if you're kind of proud of what you've done, if it makes sense and it's a good piece.
Yeah.
I like to have, but the actual doing of it, I don't think I'm all that passionate about it. It's sitting in your butt in a chair.
Yeah.
Bashing your brains against some problem. And I'd much rather be working in the woods at that moment.
Right.
You know, but then somebody sends you to Alaska to go fishing and investigate the Pebble Mine, you know.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're on a bush plane in Alaska, and that's a heck of a lot better than tree planting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then you come home, and some of these stories, the stories are so wild. Like some of that captive trophy shooting people. You talk to these people who they pay money and they'll shoot this big elk from like 20 feet away, and they mount it on the thing, and it's like, what do you think about that? You know, like what's going on? Like what do you think about that? That's so different than me.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of fun. You know, you're just in all different kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we've officially exited the heyday of print, which the heyday of print lasted for
long time.
When was the Gutenberg press invented? In the 1600s or something?
Yeah.
I don't even know. I mean, for hundreds of years,
Yep.
the print word was El Primo.
Yep.
And I believe that it's never going to fully be replaced, but obviously the internet, video, all these other forms of communication are really powerful. But how has is the writer, like being a writer? You know, being a writer has this sense of a person that understands what's going on and is a powerful communicator and has influence.
Yep.
I mean, that's the way I would describe it. Is that still alive?
Not as much, because like you get people who are bloggers, and actually some of them are great. You know, a buddy of mine who's a novelist, he said the cachet of being a writer is gone. You know, everybody's kind of a writer.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. And I do think back in the day, like I read Bill Heavey at Field and Stream a lot, you know, and he's really funny, and that's still extremely hard to do.
Yeah,
you know, that ain't on YouTube, that ain't on the on Facebook very often. How often do people like uproariously funny? Right. You got to work at that. That's a job. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes like Heavey and stuff like that, that's still going. Eddie Nickens at Field and Stream is able to write these incredible stories like about dog hunting and and I think if you're willing to work at it that hard, that you can still kind of, you're never going to be as big as you were in the 50s when there were only a handful of them.
Right.
There's a million of them now.
Yeah.
In a way, it's a meritocracy though. Yeah. Like who's great?
Yeah.
You know, guitar players. Like, how many times have you ever sat down with somebody who could play guitar as well as anybody you've ever heard on the radio? But they just didn't make it because either maybe they drank too much or they were too busy raising little kids or whatever, but they're this virtuoso on a guitar. I've seen it.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like that. There's a lot of guitar players and not that many much room at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I still do think that I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's what I think there's still a space for the written word that is super powerful.
There is for excellence. There is a space.
Yes. And I think that the pendulum is going to swing back, and I think it may even be now at some level.
Yep.
I mean, people are going to, internet and technology and video and easy access to stuff that doesn't take any brain capacity to digest. Like, to read something, you're using brain power. Yep. Calories. Yep. Brain calories to read this, and it makes you a sharper person.
You're being engaged.
Yes.
It's like you're bringing it. You're not just reading is not just passive.
That's right. I told my oldest daughter is at college right now, and the older I get, the more I am grateful for things that I started doing 20 years ago.
Yep.
That I'm now reaping the benefit of when I'm 40.
Yeah.
one of the things that I told her, it was just kind of a candid conversation we had, and I said, I am so glad that I have continued to read through my adult life.
Yep.
And I think it has helped me develop as a person.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying all this to get back to this idea of being a writer. Hal,
Sure.
Because I mean you're that's what you're known as. That's what you are. Is you're a writer.
Yep.
And I think that's a noble thing. And I think that I think you're right. I think the guys that can do it well will continue to use that medium in a powerful way. And I know you're writing a book too.
I am on America's public lands, which is a subject that's like I'm completely passionate about. This ain't a heavy lift, you know.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'm not like a big conspiracy guy or a Teotihuacan end of the world as we know it type stuff, you know. But I went back the other day and I was reading Thomas Paine, Common Sense, the pamphlet that set off the American Revolution, you know.
Yeah.
And I do think that, now again, I'm going to sound like a black helicopter dude, but I'm not. But like, there is going to come a time in every nation's history, in every place in the world, where the power of what Tom Paine did, and it's not going to be on the internet because that's all going to be monitored. I mean, you're monitored. Like a buddy of mine, and his phone congratulated him for like 20 trips this year, and it had everywhere he had been. Mm-hmm. From Mexico and Chile to all over the West, you know. And so what Thomas Paine did, you could do in the future if you needed to have a rebellion. Yeah. And great writers would be saying, this is the argument for this, the time is now.
Yeah.
And it would be the same as when they were in Albert Camus was walking around Paris under the Nazi occupation, and they carried pieces of a printing press in their overcoats, and then they would all meet like a flash mob, but this ain't on the internet because they would have been caught.
I see what you're saying.
And they assembled the printing press. They ran off the pamphlets for the partisans against the Nazis, and then they took the printing press apart, and they all disappeared.
Wow.
And the ones that got caught were killed, you know.
Wow.
And so the printed
we better
word,
sharpen up our skills.
Yeah, the printed word is going to be with us.
Yeah. I really believe that. And you know, I talk to people. I mean, I kind of keep my pulse on or I'm trying to on the book world.
Yeah,
and books are doing good these days.
Some books do incredible.
Well, I mean, just walk into Barnes and Noble.
Yep.
And I mean, the place is full of books, and that place is hopping with people.
That's right.
It's not like going to the arcade that nobody goes to anymore because you can play video games at your house.
Gotcha.
Which I've never played video games in my life.
I played them when you put the quarters in them.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, but no.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I that to me I wanted to have that conversation with you about writing because I do think it's important, especially in modern times when hunters are being marginalized as this. I mean, we're 4.5% of the population of people in the USA that hunt.
That's scary.
We got to be sharp people.
Yeah,
that's what I believe.
Yeah,
and I think this passion that we have for hunting, for public lands, for the type of lifestyle that we lead, has to fuel us to be our best selves.
Yeah,
can I say it that way?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, to me, that comes in a lot of different forms. For me to be my best self, but part of that is reading. Yeah, is writing. Is staying sharp. Yep. And I encourage people to read. Read the written word. Yeah, for sure. And also balance it with like I think Edward Abbey said, be a half-hearted fanatic. He said primarily be outside, looking and enjoying, and seeing how much there is there to love. Yeah. And then you can celebrate that in your own writing and in reading. Like I love like essayists like Tom McGuane. We talk about a lot. He's a great fishing writer. He lived in Montana. Yeah, he's old. He's pretty old now, and he's still working at the height of his powers, and he's still like. I read that, and I was like, that's what I want. I love in fishing, Yeah, and he got it. And to do that, he has to come inside and say. He told me one time. I've been lucky to interview him.
And he told me that he no longer struggled with a piece that he had to write. He said, if I'm struggling with it, I'm too old. He said, I have to go outside and just go fishing because I don't have that much time left. He said, I don't have time. He said, when I was your age and younger, I would sit down until I got it, no matter what.
Yeah.
He said, but now, he said, I write the things that interest me the most, and the rest of the time I spend outside hunting and fishing, training dogs.
Yeah.
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 But you got to earn that place.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, so how your work with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and you being the voice inside their podcast has made you a spokesman for public lands. We were talking earlier. You're from North Alabama.
Yep.
I'm from Western Arkansas.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes I said that I think sometimes people from the South sometimes have a hard time identifying with the mission of BHA, not getting behind it. I mean, we got a strong Arkansas BHA chapters and Southeast chapters and stuff.
Yeah.
But we don't have the public lands issues that you guys have out west.
Right.
We do have some, but they're just not the same.
Yeah.
And so we hear all this stuff about public lands, keeping public hand. And man, I can get behind that. I mean, it sounds good.
Yeah.
But we don't privatization of public lands in Arkansas is just not happening.
Not yet.
So what I think is that if just envision that we knew, what I want you to do is I want you to talk to us as if we knew nothing.
Okay.
Because I think everybody and their brothers talking about public lands these days.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a trendy thing to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we've skipped over the actual knowledge of what's happening.
Okay.
And we've just jumped on the bandwagon because it's cool.
Right.
Can I say it that way?
Yeah, for sure.
And so I want to take a step back because, all of us can get behind wanting to keep access to public lands.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an easy thing for a hunter to get behind. It's an easy thing for a hunter to begin to understand the history at a narrow level of public lands that, it was Theodore Roosevelt and a bunch of those guys in the early 1900s that loved hunting and wanted to see wildlands protected that started the Forest Service.
Right.
But talk to me about what's happening out west and why this movement is so critical right now.
Well, what I'd go to too is try to dispel some ideas of disinformation that people might have. One is like you could say, I think it's 70-something% of Nevada is federal land, and people go, well, that's ridiculous. The federal government shouldn't even own that and all. And then you look at Nevada, and it's the Mojave Desert. And it's the Jarbidge Range, which without that, when they overgrazed that and they didn't have enough water down below, there's no rain. So these were lands in the West completely. We gave away under all the Homestead Acts. Our federal government gave away everything plus that people could have ever wanted.
The Homestead Act would have been back in the 1800s when they said if you can go out there and you can take what you want.
Absolutely. And the problem with it was you got 160 acres in a place that got 2 inches of rain, so it really didn't work. But some of it did. Oregon certainly did. California.
Yeah.
But 1867 there was one coming out of the Civil War. You could go west and claim on a homestead. The last one that we had several Homestead Acts. The last big one was 1909. And a lot of that was like eastern Montana. It was like the stuff that nobody else had claimed, right? Because you couldn't really make a living on it. And so there was enormous abandonment. So people came west on trains. They had the rain follows the plow, right? The trains wanted more customers. So
the train followed the plow.
Yeah, they said that the rain would follow the plow. Once we plowed up all the plains, it would start raining again and more than it ever had before. That was completely invented.
Oh, okay.
It was just a completely invented thing to give away more land so the railroad would have more passengers and then they would have more grain as long as it's lasted. So 1909 Homestead Act was really pretty lean. It's that hardcore parts of Nebraska. That's like the last stuff that was left. Nevada. Utah, all this stuff, but I know Eastern Montana the best. So 1909, they gave away a lot of homestead land. People settled on it. There was some rainy years for a little while. And then by 1925, like the population of Phillips County had gone up at Montana, eastern Montana, had gone up to 20,000 people. And then it quit raining. And people did whatever they could, including eat the dog and burn the house, to survive. And by 1925, there was about 1,100 people left there.
Wow.
And there were 5,000 head of abandoned animals on the range there, plow horses and stuff like that. And so it took so what we did was the same thing happened in the east, like the Nantahala National Forest, the Pisgah National Forest, the Ouachita, Apalachicola National Forest in Florida. They had logged these places flat. They were free. It was frontier style, right?
Yeah.
And a timber company would file a claim, but they didn't pay. They would log it flat, and then they'd abandon it. And it was eroding so fast, like up in Nantahala. And I can't remember the name of the forest around Asheville, North Carolina, but it filled up the French Broad River with sediment. And then the French Broad River began to flood massively, right? Because there's no timber to stop the runoff.
Right.
And then the river was full of mud. So people were taking it. They were losing everywhere. Towns being flooded. And so they passed in 1911, they passed the Weeks Act in Congress, and that allowed the federal government to buy back or take over these abandoned lands in the south and the east. Apalachicola National Forest was one. They had cut all the longleaf pine out of there and then turpentined it, for the stumps, and then abandoned it. And it was just wreckage. And so under the Weeks Act, the federal government could use taxpayer money to start restoring these landscapes. Which they didn't know.
What year was the Weeks Act?
1911.
Man, that was. I mean, all that happened. That's a part of our story in Arkansas about bears being extirpated.
Yes.
Landscape level logging. I mean, that happened all over, didn't it?
Yeah, and beyond just the landscape level logging was the disasters of the floods and the rivers filling up with mud and losing so much topsoil.
Yeah.
And so we put the Weeks Act through the Congress, and they began to acquire like the what became Bankhead National Forest in Alabama. But in Montana, they had so many places that were abandoned and completely destroyed. Like you'd graze the last piece of grass off of it before you gave up,
Yeah.
And this wasn't anybody's fault. I mean, this is just people trying to make a living in a place where it doesn't rain.
Right.
And so they passed what's called the Bankhead-Jones Act, and that was before the 1930s, before the Dust Bowl. I mean, Dust Bowl was coming. Everybody knew that we had overgrazed and over-timbered, and we knew it.
Yeah.
Roosevelt and all of them knew it. But they passed the Bankhead-Jones Act, which allowed the federal government to then buy or take over these homesteaded lands that were completely destroyed and restore them. And then they would lease that restored ground for grazing, and they use the money from the grazing to support the public education in say Land Grant University, Montana State University.
Yeah.
So they were fixing all these problems. You got uneducated folks who didn't know that if it doesn't rain, you can't raise 5,000 sheep. But you got a university now; their kids can go to it and learn about grazing. And the experiment that failed of homesteading these dry places, well, we fixed it. We fixed it with taxpayer money. So we have.
What do you mean? How did you fix it?
Well, Congress passed the Bankhead-Jones Act.
Okay.
And they then employed soil scientists and range ecologists to replant, what would grow there and slowly restore that range to a usable condition. So one of the things in this public lands research I keep coming up with is how damn successful the United States of America and its people have been in both wrecking stuff and fixing it.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
I mean, we got to be the best in the world at both, and you go over to somewhere like I've never been to Syria, but and even in England where their topsoil is there's 4 feet of topsoil gone in the last 2,000 years,
Wow.
And we just have gone a different direction.
Yeah.
And part of this is the system of public lands. In California, they looked at L.A. and they said, it doesn't ever rain. There is no water. But there's a city already of almost 1 million people. And they said, what are we going to do? They said, we're going to have to make sure that nobody overgrazes or overtimbers that San Gabriel national mountain range.
Right.
And Los
It's
Angeles.
the watershed for their
LA.
water source.
Yeah, and without it, it doesn't. There's no rain. If you don't catch the snow and the rain coming off into that high mountains, there's no water down there.
Yeah.
And so you don't go killing the only goose that you got that's laying the only golden egg that you can't live without. The same thing as where I live was the headwaters of the Sun River drainage. It's all irrigated agriculture, 9 inches of rain a year. There's all irrigated, and they said, boy, they were cutting all the railroad ties up there, and then they were putting the sheep in there by the thousands and thousands. And once those rivers started degrading, people downstream started going, holy smokes, it doesn't rain here.
Yeah. There's no more water coming from up there.
And it's not coming anymore. It's too eroding in and filling in. So it's all been very practical.
Now, if I'm jumping ahead, stop me and tell me where I should go. But so all these homesteaders came out here and tried to homestead this land.
Yep.
Learned that much of it they could not homestead.
Right.
So that land went back into the hands of the federal government.
Yeah.
Because it had to be owned and managed by somebody.
Yeah. Well, the free range was a disaster.
Yeah.
It was just, you just take the last piece of grass. It was tragedy of commons type stuff, you know, on that one. And we've learned since then we're not as bad as we were.
Yeah.
But it reverted back under that Bankhead-Jones Act, just in the same way, say, the Bankhead National Forest or the Ouachita was taken into federal hands under the Weeks Act. So that's why we got these things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's amazing.
In Arkansas, and it's probably this way everywhere, but it's real clear where the public land starts and stops.
Yeah.
Because of basically it's land that is very difficult to use.
That's right.
I mean, you'll be driving through this pretty flat, good-looking farmland,
right,
and then all of a sudden the terrain just drops into these big canyons and hilly stuff, and it's like, all right, we're in the national forest, kids.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nobody wanted to live there.
Right. That's right.
Everybody wanted to live in the flat country, and really, that is why. I mean, to somebody that doesn't know much at all about public lands, public lands are basically the places that
Nobody claimed.
And in Arkansas, and it's probably this way out west too, there's remnants of when it was in private ownership.
Yeah.
Like lots of the places in the Ozarks and Ouachitas, there's old, you can see foundations of old houses and old rock walls and different places where people tried to make a living for a period of time on some real rough ground that they probably got for real cheap.
Yep.
Or they were
free.
Yeah, or free. And then essentially they went bankrupt and it went back into or they sold it or however it got back to the federal government. So anyway, I mean that's a story maybe not everybody knows.
I don't think people know it, and there is an anti-public lands movement, and people hate the federal government so much that it's like they would give away their national forest in some kind of protest. I mean, I don't know what people are talking about with that now in the East or the South.
Yeah.
But in the West, we have all this anger over federal land management.
Yeah.
And, to be truthful with you, that's always going to be there.
Yeah.
Because it's this incredible piece of ground where you can take a pack string and go elk hunting for 2 weeks if you want, or go hiking all day, every day. And when you got something that's that valuable now, it's attained these values as the population of the United States has gone to 330 million or whatever.
Yeah.
We're always going to argue over that. It reminds me of my family and this property, this farm that I inherited when my daddy died. We inherited together. We don't agree over the management of that property. We
you
argue,
and your siblings.
Yeah, no, we don't. We argue over it, but we all love the property and want to keep it.
Yeah.
It reminds me in a microcosm of what this is.
Yeah.
You can't expect there not to be conflict over logging, out west.
Yeah.
I mean, there's places we need more logging. There's places we wish we had less logging.
Yeah.
We're always going to have to argue over it.
Yeah. Now, what you told me, and you said it earlier today, but you said it there, is that there is some just anti-government sentiment that seems to fuel some of this. That was kind of news to me.
Yep.
I mean, that it's kind of a mind frame in some people, just this anti-government thing.
Yeah, they just hate the government, and I'm okay with that, But that doesn't mean you want to not have any place to go hunting ever.
Right. I mean, I think probably most of the people that would listen to this podcast would prefer less government over more government, but there's a lot of good things our government does for us, and one of them is maintain our public lands.
Yeah, I mean exactly, and there's really no other country in the world. Canada has the crown lands, and the people don't have much say over how they're disposed, but they can use them.
Yeah,
but we have the ability. Americans raise hell, like they squabble, and they always have. We don't have like a monarchy. Where everybody goes, God save the Queen or whatever. We we laugh at stuff like that. And so people who think that there's 640 million acres of American public lands. And that's Bureau of Land Management, which was a lot of that grazing land in the interior West that was too dry for anybody to settle.
Yeah.
And that's leased for grazing now at the lowest grazing rate in the world, which is $1.66 for a cow-calf pair for a month. That's really low, and it loses money, but it also keeps small ranchers on the land. And I personally, because I live in a ranching town, I guess I'm biased. My son does that kind of work and stuff. I think there ought to be small ranching in the West. I like cowboy culture and people raising their family out in the middle of nowhere and doing rodeo and being free and shooting guns and going hunting.
Yeah,
I think that's a great part of America.
Yeah.
And this is part of that. Like people who are the anti-public lands movement, they don't have any idea that if those lands were transferred to state control, they'd be sold because the state can't manage them. They don't have the budget.
So that is a big point that somebody could just take a little nugget away to understand. The anti-public lands movement is not necessarily the federal government selling this land to some big private corporation. Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. That would happen too.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk of giving it back over to the states.
Yeah. And here's one thing you ought to know on that is the states never had it. Like under the Enabling Act of whatever it was, under statehood in Utah, they specifically relinquished control to all federal lands within the state. They never had it. There was never a place in Utah that was owned by Utah, and the federal government came in and took it. I mean, there is eminent domain in national parks, like in the East.
Yeah.
But that's not part of this discussion.
I see what you're saying.
These were unclaimed lands. The state relinquished any claim to them in Nevada, Utah, Montana, Idaho, and then they became states. And these federal lands remained within them.
Okay, the way you said it right there makes sense to me.
Yeah.
These were unclaimed lands, and essentially would be like a state formed around this unclaimed land that was owned by the federal government. And so now some of these people are coming in and saying, hey, there's federal land inside the boundaries of my state, and the government doesn't have a right to own land in my state.
But they do under the Constitution and under the Enabling Act.
Okay.
And the thing is this: if this were some kind of evil thing, I would be for fixing it. Like, how do you fix it? But instead, it's like the kind of the best thing ever about our country to me.
Yeah.
Is that we have all of these lands that we all can use and share and wander around and look at.
Yeah,
like canyon lands in Utah with all those crazy pictographs, and you can go hunting in Montana or hunting in Colorado.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
so
I don't know what people are so angry about.
Federal yeah. Well, and it's an issue of finances as well too, because these big, vast, 640,000 acres of public land,
million.
Excuse me, million. Yeah, that's what million. It costs money, especially out west.
Right.
Fire suppression.
Yep.
Just management of roads and
100%.
The management of control, all the money that goes into. So, is there financial issues like the federal government saying we don't have the money to properly manage these, so we want to turn it over to the states?
No, that's never come up because the states would have to sell them. because the states definitely don't have the fire management money, that the feds have. When all 300 million of us, however many of us pay taxes, we're paying in. You've got a bigger chest to manage whatever.
Okay.
The other thing it keeps coming up as he goes, all this land doesn't pay in taxes. Like if some millionaire owned the Ouachita National Forest, they would be paying land taxes.
I see.
And so your state would have more money then.
So that's one of the arguments, this is untaxed land.
Yes, but a county like San Juan County in Utah, which is something like 80%, 90% public land, they get what's called, and you'd have to Google this because it's very complicated. It's another American thing that we figured called payment in lieu of taxes, or PILT. And so federal lands do bring money into states and counties.
Okay.
In addition to logging and employment and different stuff like that, but they bring in payment in lieu of taxes.
Okay.
And, if you owned that desert in Nevada, I'm not sure you'd pay more taxes on it. How would you? What would you do to generate money from this desert so that you could pay higher land taxes? I don't think it works. These are deserts. Yeah. They're alpine rock and ice wilderness.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to be making you money.
Yeah.
And where we have mining resources, we've mined.
Mm-hmm.
There's abandoned mines where we have energy resources. We've leased and we've harvested the energy. The idea that all this stuff is somehow locked up is another thing I hear in the South and stuff. They go, they got it all locked up. You can't use it. I was like, I go shooting almost every week on a piece of BLM. I drive out there. And if you go to Wyoming, you're in the energy fields for miles, 100 miles of coal bed methane. There's 4,000 coal bed methane wells abandoned on public land in the Powder River, Wyoming, which ain't a good thing.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you one thing. They didn't want to own that land.
Yeah.
They wanted to get the coal bed methane and then get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, nobody in their right mind would want to own an oil field when the oil's gone.
Yeah.
So we balance things out.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me how, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is helping the public land situation.
Yeah. So one of the things they've done is they've raised awareness amongst hunters and fishermen.
Yeah.
About not just this movement to privatize or give away or sell off our public lands, which is real, but just about public lands management, and access to public lands, like where they're landlocked by private.
Yeah.
Crazy Mountains in Montana.
Yeah.
They've raised awareness of activist people who are hunters and fishermen who heretofore
are now paying attention.
They're paying attention. Yeah. Because we took this for granted until this big, like the Bundys that, had the standoff with the BLM over the cattle out in Nevada and in Oregon. We didn't really realize that there was like an American Lands Council, which is a well-funded organization, which is devoted to getting rid of federal public lands. And they really are. They're not kidding.
Yeah.
And here's people I know who go elk hunting. There's the only thing they live for. You got mules.
Yeah.
These people they're keeping a string of feeding horses and mules. They go elk hunting every year, and they never dreamed that anybody would get rid of part of the Lewis and Clark National Forest or that they would even dream of. Well, they're dreaming of it.
Yeah. Wow. So that's a good description of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Yeah.
They're an activist organization that's got people looking at the issues.
You bet.
I've got an example. And I said this to you earlier. We don't have the public lands issues in the East like you do in the West.
Right.
And so sometimes
I think you will.
Well,
within
we
our
probably
lifetime.
will.
Yeah, for sure.
Talk about it being an activist organization. There was just recently, 2 months ago, there was a public input period of time for the state of Florida when they were revising their bear management plans.
Okay.
There's been a massive pushback by the animal rights groups and different people in Florida saying we don't want a bear hunt.
Gotcha.
Well, Florida is a pretty rural, wild place, really, except for these big urban centers.
Which outvote everybody else.
Yeah, so it's the typical story.
Yeah.
Well, Backcountry Hunters Anglers Southeast sent out, and I don't remember how they did it. They sent out an email, they sent out some Facebook stuff, and they said, hey, we want hunters and anglers to voice in to this public input session in Florida.
Yeah.
And you went into the website and you got a direct link that sent this email to this place. Well, I did it. I posted some stuff about it, and a bunch of people did it. And anyway, the report that I got back after that from the guy that talked to the biologist, he said that and I don't want to quote the actual numbers because I'll probably get it wrong, but I want to say there were hundreds of backcountry hunters and anglers guys that made comments that far outnumbered the negative comments, and it was solely just because we were grouped together. We were unified. It was easy, and we were activated, and it was easy to do it. All you had to do was, go to this website. Anyway.
And here's the thing too, especially when you're in the service, something like those biologists know that there's enough black bear to hunt.
Yeah.
So it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. The state has management, and there's enough bears to hunt, and it's way out in the middle of the country where you can hunt them.
Yeah.
It's like that. The people's emotion inside Orlando shouldn't be making the rule out there, but they will unless you get together and push back.
Right. And the thing to me, and I told you this, I've taken a little bit of flack for being in back. There's a little bit of skepticism in the South, and it's I don't quite understand it, but man, it was the Backcountry Hunters Southeast that was stepping up and standing up for bear hunting in Florida. Yeah. And it's not over yet. I mean, there's a lot left to do, but just in that one instance, I do have that example.
Yep.
But the point of me saying that is that if you can unite people and get them pointing in the same direction and paying attention, you're winning.
You are, and
that's what BHA's done.
And one of the things that's happened here is it's like, I don't know what the ages are, like 20 to 40. I mean,
pretty young
it's
demographic.
Really young, and those people were not around when it was just like other older conservation groups.
Yeah.
I mean, people were getting so old around Montana. You'd go to these meetings where Valley County Sportsmen's Association, this old sporting, that's what they did. They go to the legislature and they go like, no, you're not going to close off access to, the river, and these guys, but they were getting so old and nobody was coming in behind them until BHA started and appealed to a younger bunch of folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that might be the longest, the biggest power that they have, really.
Yeah.
Like the most positive thing they've done is for young people to have a go place. Like my son's 19, his friends are all into it, and they're like 19.
Yeah.
And they hunt like harder than I ever did. They got, it's a time in their life when they're free to do it.
Yeah.
They're hiking into the Gravely Mountains. They're packing out elk from 8 miles away,
Wow.
And I think it's just cool. It's totally, they're floating the rivers.
Yeah.
Fishing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, what would you say the biggest what's the biggest threat to public lands in the West?
The biggest threat to public lands in the West is enough people in America don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and have no idea of the level of freedom that this represents. And sometimes when you don't know what you got, people take it from you before you get a full grasp of it.
Yep.
That's the danger.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of disinformation out there from people who don't want this to continue, saying that the feds have locked up this and done that. And the place is so huge and there's so many different problems like in management, that you can easily focus on the negative.
Right.
And forget that I'm going elk hunting next year, on public land for as long as I can afford to be out.
Yeah.
We've got a problem in the United States where we started focusing on the negative, and I think it's because we don't know. I've been deep immersed in this history, And when I did my gun book, that's what it was. It was just a history of America, like, written in gun smoke, really.
Yeah.
And I just love that. And I find people just don't know that history, so they don't know how we got here.
Yeah.
And so really kind of the path forward is pretty cloudy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you don't know what the Weeks Act is and how you got the Nantahala National Forest where you go run your dog every week, you might not be able to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the threat. The threat is not people not knowing what we got.
And just taking for granted that we'll always have what we do have now.
Exactly. And why would we? Nobody else in the world's got anything like it.
Yeah. What you said about the trend inside of it, maybe it's other places, I don't know, but I do know it's here. So the trend in American culture is to find the point that we disagree on.
Yep.
And make a big stink about that.
Yep.
I mean, what you said about your family land in Alabama, I think is a great example.
Yep.
That you and your siblings, who you love and get along with, I'm sure.
Yep.
And there is disagreements even on that of how it's going to be managed.
Yep.
We just have to understand that, man, on a big block of public land out west, there's going to be a lot of people with interest in that land. Yep. Some of us have interest in it for the wilderness, solitude, and hunting.
Yep.
Some of us might have interest in it for ATV riding.
Yep.
Some of us may have interest in it for grazing cattle.
Yep.
Some of us may have interest in it for making a living for our family, logging timber off government contracts.
Yep.
Like, everybody has this angle, and I mean, we've got to be able to see the broad picture, which is this is public land. It's ours. We need to keep it in the public domain.
And fix what's wrong with it,
Yeah.
And like Congress has choked the budgets for the Forest Service. It's actually better. It's a little better now because the Forest Service is not choked down by having to pay all their fire costs, That they separated that out recently. And which is really positive. But I have a vision for all this. It's the reason I embarked on this book project. I could see how this could be made to work in a much more more a way where people could be more excited. And one of the things that I'd like to see was I made a living contracting federal land jobs, climbing pine trees and for nurseries and building trails and bridges and all that stuff. I had a great time with that. But I think if the Forest Service would have like an AmeriCorps of tree planters and thinners and then have like more employment on public lands, like doing good work.
Yeah.
Habitat restoration, watershed stuff.
I see.
And I think there's a future where we have more engagement with public lands and employment.
Yeah.
Because we've cut that too far.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's separating people out like from didn't you say you were hunting up off of Highway 90 there, Alberton, St. Regis, all that country?
Yeah.
So Mineral County, Montana, I think is 93% public land. It was all logged off completely and replanted and logged to some extent. There's not much logging left in there. There's not that much valuable timber left. It will be someday, but there's very few jobs.
Yeah.
And what jobs are done there are done by visa laborers from like Central America. And that makes people mad. If you grew up in Superior and the high school's closing because you ain't got enough kids in it. And your daddy had a job at a mill and that you don't have that anymore, that makes people mad.
Yeah.
And I just think that you could go in there and you'd have more employment thinning timber and restoring watersheds and replanting trees and cutting trees where necessary, where sustainable.
Yeah.
And get you a sawmill that operates that owns smaller timber and let's get some energy.
I see what you're saying.
Other places are fine to just sit there and be the hunting country or be the protection of the watershed,
Yeah.
But I don't think that. I think we can do better as long as we keep the baby and the bathwater both.
Yeah. This sounds like some Roosevelt New Deal kind of stuff, like
yeah,
like build some programs for people to engage. Yeah.
And I think people, I mean, I don't think anybody, you and me are pretty active outdoorsmen, you know, but there's a lot of room for people to get up and move around.
Yeah.
From what I see at the Walmart down here,
Yeah.
they could use a little public land, like swinging a
That's
Hodad or whatever.
Hodad.
Yeah, like, you know what I mean?
Yep, I do.
mean, high school kids could be happier, I think, and healthier if they had a little dose of the Ouachita National Forest and let them know what's there.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You know?
That's right.
It's our America, man.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Hal, thanks a ton, man. What you've said has helped me understand it at a greater degree.
Yeah.
And I think it makes even more sense to me now. Is there anything that I haven't asked you, or anything you'd like to say?
I think we're good. I mean, I don't want to beat the horse down, but I want people to engage. I want people to seek. I mean, it's hard to take a trip. We're busy, you know. But I think that I just was down in southern Utah recently as part of this book research and stuff, and I just was so blown away by what we got. I mean, and I went down to Gold Butte National Monument in the Mojave Desert on this same trip and looked at those pictographs and think about those thousands of years of people doing that, traveling through those deserts. What were they doing? You know, you'll never know.
Yeah.
And the mystery of it all, and the Olympia National Forest, the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, and the Pisgah and the Nanahaga, the Ouachita, Apalachicola National Forest. It's like, sometimes I'm just so blown away by what we've been born into as this birthright.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why I'm doing this book. And I did this movie that's coming out. It's called Public Trust. It'll be out next year. It won a film festival that it came out at. It's about public lands and the threats to them. Not everybody will like it, but I'm just blown away by what we got.
Yeah.
And I think if other people would be blown away too if they just started looking.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's awesome, man.
I appreciate your letting me talk on here because this has been interesting.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing. I do. And where can people find you, Hal? Like, they can find the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers podcast.
Yep, they can.
Just search that anywhere you have a podcast, I guess.
It's called Podcast and Blast, and there's 70 episodes published so far.
What's your favorite one? What could they listen to? What would you tell them? Which episode?
Well, my favorite ones are less popular than most of them. My favorite one was with this Stephen Pine, who's written 35 books, Pyne, on fire.
Oh, okay.
And he's just filled with this philosophy about wildfire and us being, for instance, he said photosynthesis binds things together, binds things in the world together. They build, and fire takes them apart. And you can't have one without the other. That fire, they don't exist. They grow forever, and it doesn't work without fire.
I see.
So the whole world is like based on fire. And before people evolved and found fire, he said, before we learned to cook, your brain couldn't really be larger than your digestive system. Right. So people's intelligence that has allowed them to get a tighter grasp on the world is basically a result of fire.
Yeah.
And then he just rolls.
Yeah.
For like an hour. I think I was telling you on that podcast, I was learning to be quiet. It was like, let this guy talk.
You remember what episode, that number that was?
It's only been like a month ago.
Okay.
So it's in the recently. 60s. Yeah.
I actually just read a book. What was the guy's name?
Pyne. Pine is his last name.
Did he write a book?
Oh, yeah. He's written 35, but he's got...
Did he write a book called Catching Fire?
Probably. That's probably his.
This guy wasn't...
I don't know if that's
this guy
it or not.
wasn't a outdoors guy, though. I read a book called Catching Fire.
Okay.
Just in the last year.
Yeah.
And it talked about how cooked food has more calories than uncooked food.
Yep.
And so humans being able to manipulate fire, we're the only animal. We're the only thing that can manipulate fire.
Yep.
And that enables us to have these big brains and then
Which
and a
enables
small
you to
digestive
manipulate
tract.
fire. Yeah.
I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things he said was like the Krebs cycle in the human cell, which causes your body to be 98.6 degrees, is simply a controlled fire explosion, electronic explosion. He said, and we did the same thing with a pickup truck engine. And and you blow up this, you set fire to this gas, and then it turns the engine, allowing you to drive your F-250. The same thing that's going on in your cells. And
I'll have to check that podcast
it's
out.
It's just really like it blew my mind, and it wasn't other people. Tom McGuane, the novelist, he's about 78 years old now. He gave me an interview that he's one of the funniest people that ever lived. And he just rock and rolled for like an hour and 30 minutes about hunting and fishing and writing. So check them out, and I'm gonna be listening to yours too. I'll listen to that one y'all recorded this morning.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Well, no, it's been a pleasure to meet you, Hal,
Same.
and fish with you today, even though I think you had the best spot in the boat.
Yeah.
And so that's why you were catching all the fish.
It was that braided line, man.
But no, hey, I always say the same thing when I end the podcast. I say keep the wild places wild because that's where the bears live.
Right on, man.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.